Welcome to Moonbeaming, a podcast about lunar living, magic, creativity, tarot, and more. I'm your host, Sarah Faith Gottesdiener, and I'm so honored and excited to be here with you today. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Moonbeaming. I'm your host, Sarah Faith Gottesdiener. I am so happy you're here because today's episode is quite near and dear to my heart. Today, I'm going to be sharing all about being a highly sensitive or intuitive or empath and boundaries. We'll also be discussing a little bit about the nervous system and energetics in there as well. I'm sharing about this because I have been knee-deep in all things boundaries for my upcoming class, Better Boundaries. I've been writing pages and pages of lecture notes and materials. I'm almost thinking it should be my next book because it's a sort of can't stop, won't stop sort of situation. It's all really fresh in my mind, and it all feels like something that's important to talk about, share, and discuss. And that's why I wanted to share with you here in this here podcast. Boundaries are so important. Again, as I'm going through all this research and collecting all my thoughts about the nervous system and windows of tolerance and feeling safe, the importance of boundaries, especially for those of us who are sensitives, whether that sensitivity might come from being neurodivergent, like having ADHD, such as myself, and having rejection sensitivity, or simply from being a sensitive person, like you're intuitive or you're just more sensitive to energy or sound or light. Our sensitivities are gifts. I know it doesn't feel like that sometimes, but they are. And our sensitivities require boundaries, and they require boundaries that are most likely going to be unique to us. Boundaries are not one size fits all. Part of the fun of boundaries is exploring what they are for you and for you alone. And that is what my upcoming workshop series is going to help you do. By the end, you'll have gotten to know yourself so much more intimately. You will have been given so many tools, techniques, reframes. There will also be special attention on the more sensitive folks in the world. There will be attention placed upon how we regulate the nervous system, how we think about energetic boundaries alongside magic and boundaries for business and practical. My whole thing is the practical alongside the spiritual. So this class has been percolating for years. Over the years, I have had so many people remark upon my boundaries, on my better boundaries. They've been a work in process after growing up in a background of no boundaries. If you grow up in a background with no boundaries and no one talks about boundaries, and there's a lot of abuse and you encounter a lot of abuse in your life, such as I did, and you're sensitive like I am, you've got to develop boundaries. You really can't live. You really can't thrive without boundaries. The stories I could tell you, but I shan't, but I won't. You can imagine it on your own. But I've had to develop these for my own thriving. There's no way I could have the relationships I do. There's no way I could do what I do without boundaries. I've read a lot of books about boundaries, and I wanted to present a series of workshops that combined topics I don't really see spoken about, which, energy work is key, energetic hygiene, energetic boundaries, I think is a major component, nervous system regulation, attachment style, education, and magic, and how this all gets tied together in the world. There's this other societal piece, which we'll briefly touch upon, which is that we live in a really non-consensual culture. I do tend to call it abuse culture. I know that can be activating for people. So if that's activating for you, please call it something else. But it's a culture of non-consent in general. And if you start looking around, wow, you see examples of boundary crossing basically embedded, basically baked into our culture. And we're really raised to betray our boundaries. Again, some of us, not all of us, I can't speak to everyone's experiences, but I am eyes wide open looking around in the world, and this is what I'm noticing. Another component that ties into all this, which unlocked more things for me, is understanding that I'm highly sensitive, and also my ADHD diagnosis. And again, I've probably read like 7 or 8 books on boundaries, and I haven't really seen the nuances of being highly sensitive or intuitive. And that's kind of a little bit of a sore spot, a gripe I have in general with a lot of self-development books. Like every 10th human being on this planet, I read that book, Atomic Habits, and for sure there are nuggets of wisdom. A lot of it's stolen, a lot of it's rebranded wisdom mostly, but I thought, okay, there are definitely some things I can take with me. And also, this book is not for me. It's for someone who is able-bodied, someone who is not chronically ill, and it's certainly not for someone with ADHD, because one of the cornerstones of the book is this idea of habit stacking and repetition. And it's all good. I get it. I understand, as someone who literally writes books on rituals, I understand the ritual of a good habit stack. I understand the importance of consistency. Absolutely. And as someone who's lunar and also ADHD, habit stacking and consistency doesn't always work for us in the ways outlined in the book. And I understand that books do not have to be written for those of us with neurodivergent brains. And also, I think it's good practice to talk about who your development is for. The fact that these kinds of books don't address that these practices definitely will not serve everyone, or provide footnotes or resources for folks with neurodivergent brains, is a disappointment. I understand that no one can be everything to everyone, believe me, but like between us, I'm done taking advice from people who don't have the same neurological setup as I do. I'm done taking life advice from authors who don't seem to acknowledge the existence of women. I mean, like a lot of these self-development books, as I'm reading, I'm like, okay, I guess this is a world where women don't really exist. There's nary a woman in sight sometimes, not a case study, nary a mention. And again, sure, fine, write what you know, but all I'm asking for is there to be a wider experience presented or just kind of referenced. So I wanted to share a little bit about being highly sensitive today and how we might need to calibrate our boundaries accordingly. If you are not highly sensitive, but you are intuitive, which, spoiler alert, everyone is intuitive, or you might be psychic or suspect you might be psychic, or perhaps you know someone who is very sensitive or intuitive and want to support them, this is going to apply to you. There tends to be stigma and stereotypes around those of us who are HSP, which is that they just can't take criticism or a joke or are very high maintenance or are incredibly thin-skinned. Like we're all wimps over here. When the reality is that, one, highly sensitives are incredibly strong because it's incredibly hard to live in this world and be very functioning when you're highly sensitive. It is a real feat. It is a real marathon, my friends. And two, highly sensitives have different brains. Highly sensitives are neurodivergent. Our brains process sound, light, energy different. We display notable sensitivities to various forms of stimuli. Researchers will often use the term sensory processing sensitivity, which is sort of a lot of S's, but here we are. And I think it's important to kind of pull that away from just having your feelings hurt when someone makes a comment about your shoes being untied or something like that, right? It's that we are processing all the senses, sound, light, smell, energy, vision, more than the average person. And also, an estimated 15 to 20% of all folks are highly sensitive. So that's a fairly big chunk of the population. And my experience of being highly sensitive is kind of like someone came and went and turned the volume on everything all the way up to an uncomfortable amount a lot of the time, but the volume is life. It's the senses. It's the way I process energy, sound, smells, light, all of it. And a lot of the time, it feels great. It makes everyday little occurrences like feeling the wind on my neck into an erotic, life-giving experience. I love immersing myself in art and in sound. And sometimes, like if I'm at the mall or something like that, it's like life becomes sandpaper. I've pulled together a little list that I found from Psychology Today. Here's just a little list in case you're wondering what some of the markers of being highly sensitive are. Highly sensitives process environmental stimuli more deeply. They have a low tolerance for high levels of sensory input. So sorry, it's no raves for us. Actually, I can go to raves, but maybe you won't be able to. Highly sensitives are more emotionally reactive to behaviors, more physiologically reactive to behaviors and stimuli. That's a really important one because this is where the nervous system stuff starts kicking in. Highly sensitives have stronger unconscious nervous system activity in stressful situations. Here we go, right? And also, I would add onto that the definition of a stressful situation changes a lot when you're highly sensitive, right? The metaphor I will usually use about my own life is that when I didn't know I was intuitive, psychic, highly sensitive, and I didn't have boundaries, going to a party wasn't going to a party. Sometimes even going to the grocery store wasn't simply going to the grocery store. It was a lot, right? Another characteristic of highly sensitives are being strongly perceptive of subtle differences and having stronger emotional responses, both positive and negative, like I said earlier. And now these are gifts in the sense where if we're much more perceptive, what are we going to be good at? We're going to be really great at detail-oriented things. We're going to be really great at styling. We're going to be really great at aesthetics. We're going to be great at design and art and really anything that requires that sometimes imperceptible level of perception. And I think that's really important to name, because if you know what your natural gifts are, it might be easier to create a life that revolves around those gifts, right? Maybe not look for work in a construction zone, right? That might not be your jam. Maybe it is. Maybe you have amazing energetic boundaries and you just love it. Again, we're all very different here. In general, there's increased empathy, more attunement to others, and to subtle energy. So highly sensitives make great therapists, counselors, artists, caregivers, nurses, teachers, healers. And even if that's not your interest whatsoever, highly sensitives bring a level of sensitivity to what they do. So whether you're someone who writes code for a living or someone who's a copy editor, you might bring that level of attunement and perception to what it is you do alongside your relationships and your experiences of the world, because advantages of being highly sensitive include having a really rich inner life and an incredibly developed imagination. In a research study done in 2014, researchers used brain imaging to measure the brain activity of highly sensitive people, and they found that there was increased brain activation in regions associated with awareness, empathy, attention, and action planning. So those are all really good things. I think you can kind of figure out if you are highly sensitive from everything I've laid out here. It's relatively easy. Do you have a lot of overstimulation in situations you're, quote, not supposed to? Is it hard for you to be in loud spaces or to watch violent imagery? Is it very challenging for you to be in certain settings? Before I was aware that I was highly sensitive and I would go into certain settings and not understanding that I was overstimulated, I would write off the setting. And I have to, even now, I have to be really careful that when I go into a place with a lot of people, a lot of stimulation, like let's say a perfect example, not that I'm really doing this in this age of the pandemic, but the one that popped to mind is an arcade. Like I actually love amusement parks and I love arcades. It's true. She's a fun guy. And also, before I kind of knew I had sensitivity, I would sort of write it off because I was too overwhelmed. And when I got too overwhelmed sensorially, I would just think that I didn't like something. And that's not true. I just had to develop better boundaries. I had to understand that my bandwidth or my capacity in certain spaces was just different. And I needed to calibrate accordingly. So that might be a little alarm bell for you. If that resonates for you, you might need more alone time. Sleep is a big one. Highly sensitives need a lot of sleep. If they do not get sleep, also, they can barely function. A few folks I know incredibly well can function fine on 5 or 6 hours of sleep. Do they love it? No. But can they function? Yes. I could barely function if I only got 5 or 6 hours of sleep. The day is basically done, and that's just not true for other folks I know. You can also pick up a book. Elaine Aron's The Highly Sensitive Person, I think that's literally what it's called, is a must read. It was she who coined the term and did all the first research. I also wanted to share a couple of things I haven't heard elsewhere that are signs that can get misconstrued. And one is, it sort of ties into my own experience I just shared. There can be this quality of highly sensitives where they can be kind of Debbie Downers, or they can get irritated in certain settings, in certain behaviors, like going out to a crowded club, being surrounded by people who do not have any awareness of other people or other people's personal space, or, aren't paying attention. Maybe they're spilling drinks. Maybe the space smells incredibly bad, which often is the case for clubs, or it's really loud. That's not going to be the best experience for someone who's very sensitive. So they might complain. They might shut down. They might appear like judgy about it. And it's that they're completely overwhelmed. And within that overwhelm is like not the best time. So, being critical in spaces that will cause sensory overwhelm. Maybe it's not a club. Maybe again, it's like going to the mall or an arcade or a very crowded lecture or auditorium, like those huge auditoriums that are college sometimes, So that's something to kind of think about. Another, and I haven't heard this spoken about too much, but I think I read it in that Psychology Today article that I came across when I was prepping for this episode and was like, oh yeah, that's me. Highly sensitives do not like being watched. They strongly dislike being observed. It can feel like fingers on a chalkboard. They don't want to be looked at. And often that means that work environments can be more challenging for them. And social environments can be as well. Personally, for me, my creativity is very hard to access when other people are around. When I used to work in offices, it was particularly challenging for me to focus, for me to get into flow. And that might be a sign for you. I don't hear people really talking about that. But if it's difficult for you to focus, to feel like you're in flow, to feel like you can access your creativity when other people are around, you could be highly sensitive. It isn't that you can't, it's just that it's a challenge and it takes practice. It's taken me years to be regulated doing some of the work I do, which is teaching in front of hundreds of folks pretty regularly, being seen, being perceived fairly regularly. But I can do it because of boundaries. That brings us to the importance of boundaries. and how boundaries can be different for sensitives, intuitives, and empaths. I wanted to approach this by sharing some challenges or some blocks to better boundaries that sensitives and intuitives might have, because I think that's a good way to think about it. It's a good way to address it. And I've definitely experienced these and I've seen these, whether it be in my clients or in the world. The first boundary we've got to think about, the first boundary issue is having boundaries with our empathy and with our intuition. That means not being a sponge, friends, not being a sponge for other people's emotions and energy anymore. It means not being a processor for other people's emotions and energy. We'll talk more about this in the workshop series. What I've noticed is a lot of intuitives, a lot of sensitives have learned to process the energy of a room. They've learned to recalibrate it, to process the emotions of others. For many in certain family dynamics, that was their role. And so what that looks like now as adults means that there are certain relational dynamics that we get very drained in, especially dynamics that mirrored family of origin stuff, and also absorbing emotions that are not yours, but not knowing it. And you might chalk it up to feeling off or being moody or overly emotional. And what could be going on is it's others' emotions you're being influenced by. You know, we're relational beings. And so we want to be attuned to others and their emotions and their energy, but we don't want to be influenced by it. We don't want to absorb it, not if it's not ours. And also, a lot of caregiving types have internalized that caring means absorbing and mirroring back that energy, not just with sympathy, but by possessing that energy. And fun fact, we all know that it isn't. That is not caring. We see this happen a lot, not only with empaths, but we see it in conflict or we see it in group settings. Think about how many times you will laugh when a joke is made and it's not funny. It's a real corny, super dad joke, but because everyone else is laughing, you laugh too. You don't want to appear rude. Think about if there have been times where you have gotten into an argument with someone, they're raising their voice and they get more mad if you remain calm. They take the fact that you're staying calm, that you're staying in your own energy as an affront, like you don't care. I have had someone do this to me. I've had many people do this to me. What, you're not mad? Or my feelings are so hurt. I can't believe your feelings are not so hurt about my feelings being hurt. It's super normalized to do this. I notice it all the time, not only for sensitive people, but matching energy is super normalized. And of course it is. We're relational people, right? We want coherence with other people. I am not saying that it's bad. I'm just saying it can be really taxing when you are absorbing the energy and the emotions of other people and they're not yours. And that's why a lot of sensitives are exhausted. If you're drained, if you're frequently exhausted, particularly when you are in social settings, and you don't have a chronic illness, right? Because if you have a chronic illness, you might just be tired all the time. But if you don't, you might want to look at how you process energy and if you might be processing the energy of others even unconsciously. And this is a process. It's a process to create more boundaries. There's an element of awareness there. There is an element of practice there. And there's an element of figuring out what is going to work for you over time. In the beginning, it can be hard to unlearn. It might feel foreign to not absorb other people's energy, foreign to be completely in your own energetic field and not take on the energy, the emotions, the dynamics of others. And in the workshop, we're going to be going over some techniques you can use every day. And with time and with practice, you'll be able to keep your own energy clear and know when you've got other folks' energy like Anya. You'll be able to detect it and you'll be able to transmute it and clear it. And that's something I don't always hear seen spoken about with boundaries, where yes, we have to advocate for ourselves. Yes, we have to communicate what our boundaries are. Yes, we need to have intrinsic boundaries, a term I coined. I gave a whole podcast episode on intrinsic boundaries. I don't remember the season. Sorry, you'll have to scroll and look it up if you want to listen to that. Anyway, but in addition to that self-advocacy, there's also energetic boundaries. There's a great book that we're going to be discussing. I believe it's called Energetic Boundaries. It's by Cindy Dale. It's a great starting place. The thing that I love about the energy portion is that's really where you can start to get your time back, because who doesn't want that? You've got a life to live. Who doesn't want more time? Who doesn't want more energy? I certainly do. So working on the energetic component is awesome. Okay, this is a big one. This is a big one. This is a big one. Another block to having better boundaries is not wanting to be seen as a jerk, wanting to be seen as a nice person. Like I said, HSPs, intuitives gravitate towards being the caregiver, the therapist, the teacher, and that's coming from a very authentic place. Intuitives really value care and caregiving, and we then associate caregiving with us having no needs. Because why? Because we are caring for everyone else's. Make it make sense. Make it make sense. We value kindness. We want to be kind. And we've been taught, those of us who've been socialized as feminine, women, we've been taught that kindness is keeping the peace, being in harmony with all of those around us, and caring for everyone but us. And throw that in with the highly sensitive trait of being preoccupied with everyone else. That's a trait. And we've got a recipe for real extraction and exhaustion. I'm going to tell you, you heard it here first. I'm sure you've heard it other places. I've spoken about this. You're not being kind if you are lying to other people just to keep the peace. You're being dishonest and you're being disingenuous. You are not giving folks a chance to really get to know you and care for you. Perfectionism and performance of having it all together is a trauma response. It's about control. and not trusting that someone can help you or will help you. And it's about you not trusting that someone will love you or be there for you when you can't do anything for them. It's like internalized capitalism, transactionalism, like at its worst, equating your worth with what you can do for someone else. That's not good. That's not great. And I say this as someone who has been treated poorly by people when they see my vulnerable side. But guess what? I'd rather know. I'd rather know a particular dynamic than continue on with a disingenuous relationship. You think you are being nice, but you want to be kind. Kindness is clarity. It's being okay with speaking up as needed. It's about feeling okay to ask for help or say, hey, you know what? I can't help you. Hey, you know what? I can't work for free anymore. I can't talk right now. Maybe that person will think you are a jerk. I don't know. I don't know that person, but that's a them problem. It's not your problem. People pleasing is a big block to having better boundaries. Throw in a dose of capitalistic transactionalism and the patriarchy, and we've got a big steaming pot of brainwash stew. Ugh, I don't want that. Let's compost that, right? So choose yourself first as you can. Know your limits. Advocate for yourself when necessary. There are ways to do so where you can remain kind. And we'll talk about some of those in the workshop more. We'll be going into much more detail in the Better Boundaries workshop, but I wanted to leave you with a few ideas to try in the meantime, or if you can't take the class this time around. The first one is spend time in movement that's not your normal movement. The folks who joined the resourcing for the creative self, they're going to be bored because I already talked about this and what I found out this year so far, but here goes. Yes, I am talking about exercise, but if you can't exercise, simply try moving in a different way regularly. For me, it's been boxing. I've been training this year, boxing training, and boxing is my bestie. Boxing is my boyfriend right now. The surprising part of training is how much it has helped my energetic hygiene, my energetic health, and how much it has helped repattern my nervous system. I think I've spoken on the podcast here before about how the last couple of years I've been in this energy healing study zone, kind of instead of magic. I've spoken about it here and there. At any rate, it's been a lens that I've been filtering a lot through. And boxing has shown me where I'm off balance and where parts of my energetic field need more support. Boxing has shown me how I run my energy, and it's helped me cultivate more energetic flow as well as strengthen my energetic boundaries, because it's a sport where you are up in someone else's energy and they are in your energy. And there's a lot of centering that needs to happen. There's a lot of strengthening that has to happen because there's a lot of chances to get entangled, to get thrown off course, to have the nervous system get dysregulated. And it's been really great for me. Other things, other practices that I do, they're great to get rid of excess energy or strengthen, like yoga or running, but boxing has sort of been this interesting key. So pick a kind of consistent movement exercise that might be somewhat novel, that will offer you a mirror or window into your energetic patterns. Also, I understand that it might not be the best to enter into something that is going to threaten the nervous system. So I'm not saying go box. I'm not saying go get those gloves on. Maybe you hike more. Maybe you get out into nature more. Maybe you do more nervous system relaxation, exercises and movement, and then you can interrogate your energetic patterns. You can receive more insights from that space. So figure out what works for you. A great energy clearing technique is baking soda in the bath. Salt, sure, that's great. Baking soda, really good. So try a third of the package, put it in the bath, soak in it, add some intention to it, like clearing your energetic field or having the water clear and cleanse away energy that's not yours, and try it. Try it more than once. See what happens. A lot of times we have to do these practices consistently, and we have to do them more than once. So over time, seeing what makes you feel clearer is really key. And the big thing is we've got to change the pattern. This is what I say all the time. Like, don't do a clearing spell where you're clearing your ex's energy, and then later that night you hop on social media and check out their page. Like, that is absolutely not the thing you want to do. We want to make habitual and behavioral changes around what is draining our energy or inhibiting our ability to set boundaries. You could take all the salt baths in this world, and yes, they could help you. But if you can't also communicate certain boundaries, if you aren't tuning into your intrinsic boundaries, if you aren't changing your behavior and your awareness, there is no amount of salt, rosemary, or rue that is going to change your situation. A witch wishes, right? Like, we wish, but that's not quite it. A spell is not a replacement for taking action. It isn't a replacement for behavioral changes, habitual changes, mindset changes, and communication changes. There's so many more blocks, of course. There's grief, there's not wanting to lose certain people or certain aspects of identity, there's fear of the unknown, there's not knowing what might happen when we're courageous enough to be vulnerable. I get it. It's a process. It takes time, and we always want to start where we are. If all this boundary talk has got you excited, we'll touch on it all in this Better Boundaries class. You'll leave with a lot more of your needs getting met. You'll have more energy. You'll have more time for what it is you want to do. We're going to go over quite a bit. We're also going to have some great guest teachers as well. We're going to teach workshops like herbal allies for boundaries and breath work for boundaries. I can't wait to spend time with you. Sign up as you know where. And for now, I am wishing you a lovely week, as well as all the support you need for some lovely, life-giving boundaries. Here's an assignment for the following week, for this week. Every time you notice someone with amazing boundaries, affirm them, compliment them, accept them, be inspired by them. Every time you have an experience where you honor your own boundaries, affirm yourself, do a happy dance, do it in your chair, get out of your chair, drink water. I believe in you. Magic is real. Boundaries are magic. Bye for now. Moon Beaming is brought to you by the Moon Studio. It is created and hosted by me, Sarah Faith Gottesdiener. It is edited by Rose Blakelock with a lot of additional help from Hazel Frew. It is supported by our beautiful patrons, which you can join over at patreon.com, The Moon Studio. If you would like to further support the podcast, you can sign up for a sponsorship. You can rate and review it or share it with your friends or on your social media. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you so much.